Welcome back to our Energy Systems Fatigue and Recovery video series. Hopefully you enjoyed the first video and it was helpful in developing your understanding and progressing your explanation of the ATP-CP energy system. Just a reminder about the terminology and looking at your understanding of rate, how fast ATP can be resynthesized. This indicates or depicts the intensity that we can work at, or the level of exertion or muscle contraction, and the amount of force that we can produce through how quickly we can resynthesize that energy molecule. We also needed to understand the yield or the amount, how much ATP can be resynthesized by that energy system. And quite often, the way that we break down the fuel for that energy system depicts how much or how long that system can last for, which leads into the duration. So how long the ATP that is being produced by that energy system can last and supply energy for those muscle contractions. Hopefully the first video has allowed you to use these terms quite well in describing the characteristics of the ATP-CP energy system, and then leading in through these videos, hopefully it will transfer over to the next couple of energy systems that we will talk about, which make up the three energy systems that we look at for interplay. But that will come a bit later as well. Just a reminder of the terms anaerobic and aerobic. Anaerobic meaning insufficient oxygen, which is inclusive of the ATP-CP energy system and the energy system that I'll talk about in this video, anaerobic glycolysis. Both of these energy systems allow for maximal explosive movements because they provide a very fast rate, allowing for those high intensity maximal explosive movements. But they are finite in their capacity, which leads to a short duration of involvement or contribution. The last video, which will be the next one, will depict the aerobic system. And in contrast to the anaerobic energy systems, we have sufficient oxygen being supplied, allowing this system to work. Now, the aerobic system is made up of two pathway processes: aerobic glycolysis and aerobic lipolysis, which is our combination of glycogen use and fat use. This system, the aerobic system, has an infinite capacity. If we fuel it, it can continue to work indefinitely at submaximal or sustained levels. So we will discuss the characteristics of the anaerobic glycolysis energy system in this video and its role in the resynthesis of ATP. Now, in the first video, we spoke about adenosine triphosphate, that third phosphate molecule breaking away from the energy molecule, producing energy for muscle contraction. Now, the energy systems have a role in resynthesizing or repairing this bond. So we're going to talk in this video about the role of the anaerobic glycolysis energy system in repairing this bond. Anaerobic glycolysis, hopefully the name has given you a little bit of insight into what we're going to be talking about. Anaerobic, meaning insufficient oxygen, allowing for those maximal explosive movements, a fast rate of ATP, and maximal intensity. Glycolysis tells us which fuel we are using. Glycolysis is the process of breaking down glycogen. Now we consume our foods, and our carbohydrates in our foods get digested, shuffled to the muscle, and stored as glycogen. So glycogen is our fuel for this system. It is a much more complex structure, and more complex bonds are involved in making up this structure than CP. So therefore, it will take a little bit longer, and sometimes we can't break it down completely. And that is basically what happens in the anaerobic glycolysis process. So we start with our glycogen molecules, our stored fuel, and we break it down into our glucose. Okay, glucose is more usable. It is a more simple bond of glycogen, or a simple part of the glycogen structure. And from here, we break it down into pyruvic acid. So this is the body attempting to break down our glycogen. Fortunately, breaking glucose down into pyruvic acid releases energy. This energy is donated or used to repair our ATP bond. So it allows for that resynthesis of our energy molecule. Therefore, that molecule can then break apart again and release energy for muscle contraction. The problem is with anaerobic glycolysis, as we said before, is a lack of oxygen. The benefit is we increase our yield. So as you can see there on the right-hand side, we are able to resynthesize 2 ATP molecules each time that we break down our glucose into pyruvic acid. So we've just doubled our yield compared to our CP molecule or the process of the ATP-CP energy system. But as I said, a lack of oxygen, insufficient oxygen, working anaerobically means that we end up with pyruvic acid not being able to be broken down any further. Pyruvic acid then forms lactate and H+ ions and results in an accumulation of these byproducts. Now, these byproducts do, unfortunately, have an impact on our muscles' ability to work and contract. Now, lactate is an energy molecule. H+ ions is a byproduct that causes acidity. So pyruvic acid will accumulate and cause acidity in the muscle to increase. And I'll talk about that with regards to fatigue in a minute. But VCAA love you to say accumulation of lactate and H+ ions. So if we look at our terminology, our rate of this energy system is still fast because it's anaerobic. We don't have to wait for oxygen to get to the muscle and to be used and to be involved in that slower oxygen or oxidization process. It's not as rapid as the ATP-CP energy system, as there's a couple of extra steps and it's a more complex bond, but it is still fast, allowing for maximal explosive movements. Therefore, our intensity is maximal, 85 to 95%. Allows us to work above our submaximal intensity. The yield is still small and definitely finite, as only 2 ATP molecules per glucose molecule can be produced. And it's finite in the sense that it's its own worst enemy. The more we use it, the more it actually hinders itself, and that will come up in the fatigue section. Therefore, the duration is very short, up to 75 seconds if we are moving continuously, but we can recruit this energy system to contribute in larger amounts throughout. And that will make more sense when I talk a little bit more about its contribution. If we look at a basic continuous movement, so such as if you were going for a run and you were working submaximally, the anaerobic glycolysis energy system will contribute the most to ATP resynthesis during the first 75 seconds. We know this is oxygen deficit. Once steady state is reached, this energy system will not contribute in large amounts because we are supplying the body with enough oxygen. But during that first period of oxygen deficit, we have to work anaerobically because there is a lag in the body system's ability to be able to supply enough oxygen. And we can see that in this graph as well. We have deficit at the start where our VO2, our volume of oxygen consumption, it's not enough. We cannot supply enough for our bodies to work aerobically, and our body would like to work aerobically because we don't get fatiguing byproducts. We get byproducts, but not fatiguing. That will come up in the aerobic systems video. So during O2 deficit at the start or in any increase in exercise intensity, our supply will not meet demand. The demand will be greater than our supply. Therefore, we have to work anaerobically or have large contributions from the anaerobic glycolysis system. So anaerobic glycolysis system will be the main contributor during sustained oxygen deficit. But it will also increase its contribution after steady state has been established, whenever we need to surge, whenever we need to increase our intensity, whenever the supply does not meet demand. There will be an increased contribution, from anaerobic glycolysis to allow for that ATP resynthesis. It is also a major contributor in repeat maximal efforts. If we're not talking about a continuous movement, such as going for a run or a jog, or a continuous cycle where you're trying to maintain intensity, and you are performing where it's a stop-start intermittent performance, where you can increase or decrease your intensity at will, then anaerobic glycolysis will be the major contributor to repeat maximal efforts. Okay, it will allow for those maximal explosive movements for a longer duration or an extended amount of time greater than our ATP-CP energy system. It could also be during repeated max efforts, such as performing consecutive explosive skills during a basketball game. So where Michael Jordan might have to chase up and down the court for an extended period of time, receive the ball, and then perform maximal explosive movements, anaerobic glycolysis would be contributing in large amounts. Now we have a sample exam question here where we're comparing the running times of a 100-metre sprint and a 400-metre sprint. Hopefully this links in the first video of the ATP-CP energy system and this video. So the 100-metre sprint, 9.58 seconds, the perfect event for testing your ATP-CP capacity. 10 seconds or just under 10 seconds at the elite level. Creatine phosphate stores, we know for any continuous movement, they will deplete around the 10-second mark, but also peak at 5 seconds. So therefore, the 100-metre sprint is fantastic at testing our ability to use our creatine phosphate stores. When we get to the 400-metre event, 43.18 seconds, we can't maintain 10 seconds for every 100 metres that we run. We start to get a little bit slower. Our pace has decreased. So the question says, explain why a 400-metre race cannot be run at the same pace as a 100-metre race. In your answer, make reference to energy system interplay. Now, interplay should be the first term that you associate to your response or your answer. Interplay is all three energy systems will contribute to energy requirements through both events or through all movement. If you said for both the 100-metre sprint and the 400-metre sprint, that would be the most contextualized response. In the 100-metre sprint, we know that the ATP-CP system will contribute the most. It contributes the most at the start of all exercise, but also for something that only lasts 10 seconds, it will be the major contributor. Whereas when we get past that 10-second mark and up to 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 seconds, we know anaerobic glycolysis is going to contribute the most. The difference between the two systems is the rate of ATP resynthesis, therefore depicting the intensity that we can work at. So if you look at the sample answer, we have our introductory sentence or our intro sentence. Interplay should first tell you that you need to say that. Then we're contrasting a 400-metre race and a 100-metre race. So in the 400-metre race, the event is longer, resulting in a greater contribution from the aerobic glycolysis system as well. This system cannot provide ATP as quickly. Therefore, you have to work at a lower intensity. You could have also said that the 400-metre race has a greater reliance or contribution from anaerobic glycolysis, therefore decreasing the reliance on ATP-CP, which has the fastest rate. Anaerobic glycolysis has a slower rate also, then aerobic system has a slower rate again, therefore resulting in a lower intensity or the pace being slower. Now, when we get to this element of fatigue, we indicated before that accumulation of lactate and H+ ions is the byproduct that accumulates because of not being able to break down pyruvic acid completely because we don't have sufficient oxygen. So this accumulation of lactate and H+ ions has a very detrimental process or detrimental effect to our ability to perform. This accumulation increases the acidity in the muscle, which is known as acidosis. This decreases pH levels in the muscle, creating an unstable environment. And when things are unstable in our body, other processes do not work properly. So this results in an inhibition, or it inhibits the process of glycolysis, slowing down the rate of ATP production. And we know that if the rate decreases, so does our intensity. Because when we have less ATP, it inhibits our muscle contractions. Therefore, we have to slow down. Our pace will decrease. And a question like this will pop up quite often. Now, this is testing your understanding of the aerobic system, but also looking at how the energy systems interplay together. This is talking about a men's track cycling pursuit, 4 kilometres, team of 4. They follow each other closely, and the lead rider, who works the hardest, moves up the bank of the track and rejoins the team at the rear. Now, we know from biomechanics that if you're behind someone, it's breaking the drag and the air resistance. So therefore, the person working at the front has greater force resisting their movement, so they're working harder. Since the winning team is decided by the third rider across the line, it is common for one rider to take what they call a death pull, where he rides so hard that he cannot maintain the group pace afterwards. This allows his teammates to briefly recover behind him before they make a final 3-man acceleration towards the finish line. The world record for this event is 3 minutes, 53.31. Okay, so 4 kilometres. That's a pretty significant time. That's less than 1 minute a kilometre. That's a pretty intense pace that they're working at. But for 3 minutes 53, the energy system that contributes the most is the aerobic system. Okay, because it's a long duration and we can't work for longer than, say, 75 seconds anaerobically. We have to work at a lower intensity, so aerobic system is the main contributor. But what is the most likely cause of fatigue in the death pull? Now, it says that the death pull is they make an all-out effort, they work the hardest, so therefore their intensity is higher than submaximal. So as we said before, any increase in intensity will result in a greater contribution from anaerobic glycolysis. So therefore, aerobic energy system is the main energy system, but if we have an increased contribution from anaerobic glycolysis for the death pull, accumulation of metabolic byproducts, which is lactate and H+ ions, is the only accepted response. And as you can see, students struggled with this question. How do we recover from these byproducts? Well, basically the only way you can do it is to get the blood flow going. An active recovery is your best form of recovery. What it does is it allows blood flow to remain elevated. It keeps heart rate increased, stroke volume increased, cardiac output greater, and this allows for greater supply of oxygen to those fatigue muscles. It also extends EPOC, which is the excess post-exercise oxygen consumption. It allows your VO2 to remain higher for an extended period of time. So anything that increases heart rate or keeps heart rate elevated, then that will allow for a greater active recovery or greater breakdown of lactate and removal of H+ ions. Stretching will keep heart rate up and blood flow up, but also the same activity that caused the fatigue at a lower intensity will allow for that recovery. What's the benefit? You continue to consume elevated levels of oxygen to remove the accumulated H+ ions, and you actually convert the lactate back into glycogen. It's an energy molecule. We want to keep it. We don't want to get rid of that. So we convert it back into glycogen to use at another time. Quite often, VCAA will actually ask you to compare and contrast active recovery compared to a passive recovery or no recovery at all. Now, this one is looking at blood lactate levels. Obviously, they increase throughout the performance, and then the rate of removal or the rate of recovery is depicted by what activity or type of recovery the person has chosen. Now, they compare a passive recovery to an active recovery. And as you can see, lactate levels return more quickly back to rest or resting levels, which means greater recovery, when you are working at either 35% of your heart rate max during recovery or keeping your heart rate elevated at 65 and slowly reducing it to 35%. What that is doing is it allowing for a greater oxygen consumption compared to passive, where your heart rate drops more significantly and more quickly. therefore oxygen supply will be a lot less. So the response is basically what we spoke about with the benefits of recovery. It's got a little bit of data there where you're looking at lactate levels and you're comparing and contrasting active versus passive. But it says an active recovery is used to promote recovery and clear lactate faster by maintaining oxygen levels to increase the rate of removal of lactate from the muscles. This occurs through increased blood flow, greater oxidation or oxidation of lactate, and you can return your body back to resting levels more quickly. By moving and moving around, you create a muscle pump. It reduces venous pooling and allows for more blood to return to the heart, and that increases waste removal through greater cardiac output or circulation. Hopefully this video has given you a really good snapshot of anaerobic glycolysis and has allowed you to extend your knowledge and understanding, and it's given you a great way of using your terminology. And then the last video will be around the aerobic system and allow you to hopefully develop your understanding of the third and final energy system that we will talk about. Thank you very much.